Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is a bunch of things in one, but the main purpose is a book review of The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about the movie just because I watched it the day after I finished the book. I also just got vaccinated today. Today is May 27th. May 27th?
Yes.
Okay, today's May 27th, and I just got the Pfizer vaccine, which I'm wearing a Pfizer sweater. This is actually courtesy of Grace. She found it at Value Village and I needed it because it was really comfy. Nobody knew what Pfizer was at that point, so this is all just kind of a coincidence. And here's my I got my vaccine sticker. So yeah, I'm gonna jump just right into the review, but I did just want to say, everybody go out and get your vaccines. This is just my first one because PEI is a little bit slow on the uptake, but it's fine, it's fine. So a quick plot, this is again, if you haven't watched some of my book reviews, I keep my notes down here. So I try to look at the camera, but sometimes I end up looking down a little bit. A quick plot is agoraphobic woman named Jane, which basically just means that she can't go outside. She can't leave the house. She's scared of it. She feels only safe in her house. So she sees her neighbor Jane across the street get attacked, and she calls the police and they insist that the neighbor is actually still alive. Jane then comes in because she's like, oh yeah, prove it, and it's a different woman than the one that she knows as Jane. She tries to prove that she's right, but like she knows that people are covering things up and there's a lot of other things that could possibly lead to it not being true. So that's all. Like, I know that it's very popular right now, so I do want to give the non-spoiler part first. So yeah, that's all I can really say about that. And all that you can get in the trailer from the movie, so I didn't spoil anything by saying that. So basically it's Anna, the main character, who is trying to prove that she saw this woman and this woman is real, because everyone's saying, I don't know who you think is Jane, but like this is Jane Russell, so like you're crazy. She's trying to prove that she isn't. So quickly I'm gonna run through the characters. So there's Anna, which is the main character. She used to work as a child psychologist, but now that she's stuck in her house, she can't really have any patients. So she has her own psychologist that comes once a week, and she plays a lot of chess, watches a lot of old movies, like that kind of thing. She's the one who's agoraphobic. Obviously, she's the narrator in this book. She's middle-aged, and she occasionally talks to like her husband and her daughter, who no longer live with her. Then there's David, who's the downstairs tenant, so he usually helps her out with things. He picks up her groceries for her, takes out her trash, like that kind of thing, just because she can't go outside, and she pays him a little bit extra, or she must take it off his rent. I'm not sure how that works. But then there's like the few other characters. It's a very character-light book just because she's agoraphobic and can't go outside. So there's Jane, the neighbor across the street who gets attacked. She has a husband and a son who's Ethan, that I will talk about next. Ethan is Jane's son, and Anna takes quite a liking to him, so they become great friends. Something that I loved in this book was that it was a very quick read, even though it was 430 pages. I read the entire second half of it in one night. It was just one of those books that, and I can't even explain to you why. I obviously just like the author's writing style, so I'll probably read more of their stuff. Even when it was the very beginning and there wasn't anything to the plot line, because it's not one of those books that just jumps in and immediately she's getting attacked. Like, there is a prior part to it. Even those parts I was so excited to read, and yeah, it just really grabbed me from the first page. So I definitely recommend it if you want a quick read, even though it's a little bit longer. Also, the chapters are very short. They're only like a couple pages. And something cool about it is that it says like the day and the date, which is good because every day for her is kind of the same, just because she just gets up and she's in her house and that kind of thing. So it's good to just kind of keep track of what's happening and if it's a new day, because there's a lot of different chapters within one day, so it's a little bit hard to tell sometimes. Something else is that there was a lot of plot twists in this book, which if you don't think that you're gonna like it and are okay with me spoiling it, please stay, and I will talk about some of them, not even all of them, because there was so much that happened in this book. I couldn't say them all without making this an hour long. I also will say, if you think that this all sounds interesting, at the end of this, I do talk about the movie some, but I will be saying a lot of the spoilers when I talk about the movie, so my quick movie comparison is that they are very similar. There's like a few little things that they changed, which I'm not sure why, and then there's one kind of major-ish thing that I wasn't exactly thrilled about, but otherwise I will say it is a very good movie to book comparison. It's one of the better ones I've seen, maybe the best. So yeah. I also didn't guess the ending. That is the last thing I will say about what I really liked about this, because a lot of books like this that I've talked about before, I find I guess the ending, and I'm not trying to like gloat or anything. I just find sometimes it's a little bit obvious because they'll point out just the few things that are important, and then it's like, well, now I know what's gonna happen. But like I said, this book was so detailed, I had no idea. Something that I didn't really like, it's just not my personal thing. So Anna really likes old movies, and that's kind of a lot of how she spends her day, is she's watching old movies, and a lot of them are references of old movies, and it's quoting old movies and things like that, like black and white movies. And I personally don't like anything historical. It's just not my cup of tea. Like, I don't even do like Bridgerton or Downton Abbey, like nothing like that. Grace is all over that stuff, but I am not. So, yeah, I didn't really know any of those storylines, so that was a little bit confusing for me at times, but other than that, like, there really wasn't much in here that I didn't enjoy. I would rate it for sure 5 out of 5. So on Goodreads, if you check my Goodreads, which the link will be down below, I will rate it 5 out of 5 for sure. It is one of the best books I've read in quite a while. I would definitely recommend. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Grace was saying how she wanted to read it, and then she was like, well, maybe I'll watch the movie first and then decide after if I want to read it. And I said, I don't really recommend that because they are so similar. It's different if you read the book and then immediately watch the movie like I did, because everything's different, because I'm like, oh yeah, I pictured things like that, but that's not how I pictured them. But if you watch the movie first and then read the book, it's going to be very repetitive just because it is quite like to the point. The only thing that I will say, the main thing that I didn't enjoy about the movie was that the ending wasn't explained as well, which I watched it with my boyfriend and I didn't even ask him if he understood it without all the stuff that I said afterwards, because I was like, oh, but they didn't explain this, this, and this. So that's the only thing, is that it might be worth reading the book if you want like a more detailed explanation, but that's all I'm gonna say for now. Similar books that I can think of, I haven't read, this is obviously like this is not a young adult book. I actually found it at a thrift store and I was so proud of myself, because when I told my boyfriend, oh, I want to look this book, he had said, oh, you haven't seen it here before, like that's kind of risky, I don't think you'll find it. And I was like, oh, there it is. So I was pretty excited to actually find a nice copy of it. Similar books, I haven't read a whole lot of adult books. Thrillers are probably my favorite books, though. I'm kind of learning that as I go on. I would say it's similar to Sharp Objects, and I feel like there's a couple reasons I'm thinking that. The first reason is Sharp Objects was written by the same author that wrote Gone Girl, and that's the review that's on the front cover is by that author. So I think that that's part of the reason I associate it. The Sharp Objects, there was a mini series that came out, and Amy Adams also played the main character in that, as she did in this movie. So that correlates them for me. But otherwise, it was just a really strange and messed up thrillers. They both were. So I'd say if you like things like Sharp Objects, this is a little bit less gruesome and a little bit more, I don't even know what the word is, but yeah, they're different for sure, but that's the first book that it made me think of, which I also really enjoyed that book, so it makes sense. Okay, so that's gonna be all for my non-spoiler part. I really gotta get into the spoiler part because holy crap, a lot of things happened in this book, and I wanna try to get better. As I'm reviewing them, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I say so many plot lines that don't matter. But in this one, they pretty much all matter. So I'm gonna try to get through it as quick as I can, but not talk quickly because coffee makes me talk fast. So yeah, that's gonna be all for my non-spoiler review. I would definitely recommend reading it, watching it, really anything. If you don't think you're interested in it, or if you've already seen it and you wanna hear my thoughts on it, stick around.
Spoilers.
Okay, so now if you're watching this part, please, please, please be ready to hear all the spoilers. So throughout, Anna is talking to her daughter and her husband about people in the neighborhood. That's kind of how it begins. But throughout, she's just talking to them in general and asking for their opinion on what to do about the situation. Hearing her talk about people in the neighborhood kind of makes it clear that she didn't just take an interest in this particular family. Like, she watches all of the families, and just because she doesn't have anything else to do really for entertainment. So she keeps up with what other people on the street are doing. So then the new people move in across the street, which are the Russells, and they are the main family that I will be talking about in this story. That's like Jane and her son and their husband, or whatever. Their husband, her husband. So the son comes over, Ethan, and delivers a candle to Anna and says that it's kind of like his mom asked him to bring it over, and it's almost like a housewarming thing, but in reverse. And Anna points out, like, that's kind of strange. I feel like I should be giving you something, but it was just a, hi, I'm your new neighbor kind of thing. The other thing that doesn't seem important but is important is that Anna's cat really likes him, which is a little bit awkward because he's allergic to cats, but we'll get into that later. Otherwise, there's no contact with anyone from that family until Halloween, which, like I said, they do say the date, so I know it's Halloween. And kids were outside and they were egging her house. So Anna gets really anxious about it because, again, her house is her safe space. So she wants to go out and tell them to stop, and she's yelling at them and they can't hear her. So she opens the door to tell them to stop and then basically collapses because it was just too much all at once for her. And anyways, the woman from across the street comes over and brings her back into her house and makes sure that she's okay, kind of thing. So it ends up being Jane Russell, and they spend the night talking and laughing, and Anna compliments her earrings. She's got these like little pearl earrings and she says how pretty they are, and you know, they just become really good friends and they're bonding over everything, and they talk about Jane's son, Ethan, and how nice he was when he came over with the whole candle thing, and Anna lent him movies, like that kind of thing. Later on, I think it must be the next day, maybe it's later that night, I don't remember, but Mr. Russell comes over and asks Anna if anyone in his family has been in contact with her in the last 24 hours. So Jane had said about how overprotective her husband is and things like that. So Anna covered and said, no, I haven't seen anybody. This is when the weird things start happening. That was kind of the first strange thing that happened. So Anna starts hearing screaming across the street, and she goes and she looks, and it's really dark, she can't see anything. So she calls over there and Ethan picks up, and he's very clearly upset, and she asks like, what's going on? Who screamed? Was it you? Is everything okay? And I forgot to say, I think he's like 16, 17. He's 15. He's 15 turning 16. I remember now. And he's obviously upset, and he says, no, everything's fine here. It wasn't me. It's okay. And then he hangs up. So clearly very strange. So Anna then starts doing some research, because that's the thing, is that she's very interested in people in her neighborhood. So she does research on Mr. Russell and finds out that he moved from Boston to Manhattan, and she starts to wonder why. And there's this news story, or she finds somewhere that something happened involving his boss's wife. So she thinks like, oh, he had an affair. Later on, like the next day after the screams, she just happens to be sitting at her computer and she's looking out the window and she sees Jane get stabbed. And she can't see who did it because that's kind of like in between where the windows are. But she does see Jane get stabbed and like fall, and she's banging on the window and she's asking for help and all those things. So Anna calls the police, but they're very slow to really do anything about it. So she knows Jane is running out of time. So she tries to leave the house to go and help Jane. She ends up collapsing again, and when the police show up, they must take her to the hospital. We don't know. She wakes up in the hospital, and the police aren't really giving her a straight answer on what happened. She keeps asking what happened to Jane. Is Jane okay? They escort her back to her house, and she's still asking what happened to Jane. Finally, the detective says Jane is completely fine, nothing happened. And she says, she's like, no, like I saw her get stabbed. Really? Then where is she? And Mr. Russell comes in and says, you've never met my wife. And then this other woman comes in and says, hi, my name's Jane, and it's not the same woman as before. Ethan is also there, so Anna's trying to say, you know, tell them that this isn't your mom. Like, we both know that this isn't the woman, and Ethan's very kind of like twitchy and looking around, and he says, no, you've never met my mom, and he won't admit that anything's wrong. The other detective then starts to convince Anna that she made the whole thing up. And you find out that Anna's medication that she's on for her agoraphobia can cause hallucinations, especially when mixed with alcohol. And throughout this whole book so far, she's a pretty heavy alcoholic. And you actually find out part of the other reason that they don't think that she's logical is that this husband and daughter that she's been talking to died like 10 months ago when she became agoraphobic. They got into a car accident and died, and then that's why she won't leave the house. They're trying to tell her like, oh, but I know you still talk to them, so clearly like something's wrong with your brain. And she makes the point like to the audience that she's always very careful. She'll say, oh yeah, we're separated, or they don't live here, which is what I said at the beginning. She doesn't necessarily say where they're living or that they're not alive anymore, but she kind of talks to them in her head. Which was done really well in the movie. I was a little bit worried about it, but my boyfriend didn't pick up on it. So the first scene of the movie is like her reaching for her phone, and then you hear like the husband in the background. It's her talking to the husband while she's like doing other things, and her mouth isn't moving like it's supposed to be in the past. This was the conversation kind of thing. So yeah, they do a good job of like hiding that, I think. But yeah, so that kind of makes her then look obviously not very reliable, because he says, I talked to your psychiatrist, and he says that sometimes you still talk to them even though they're not here, so you probably made it all up and it's got to be your hallucinations, like that kind of thing. So the next thing that happens is Anna goes downstairs to talk to her tenant David to ask about Jane, because he had worked over at the Russells' place, like opening boxes for them when they first moved in. And so she asks, did you meet her? And he says no. So that kind of proves again that the only person that has supposedly seen her is Anna. She then, when she's downstairs in his unit, notices an earring on his nightstand, and it's the same one that Jane was wearing that night, the one with the pearls on it. So obviously she gets really freaked out and leaves. And he can tell that she's freaked out, so he's like, oh, you probably found out about my past, and turns out that he went to prison, he's a convict, and it was because he went on an assault charge. And he says it was all of this big misunderstanding, there was a bar fight, like that kind of thing. So, but that turns out that wasn't why she was freaked out, but then that just kind of made him look guiltier. She thinks that she's losing it, and actually did imagine the whole thing, because when she asks him about the earring, he says, no, that's Katie's, like the girl, she's been spending a few nights here or whatever, and it's almost like she's been spending the night with David, she's been sleeping with him, that kind of thing. And then she remembers like hearing a woman downstairs in the shower when he was upstairs like talking to her. So she's like, okay, yeah, that checks out. So then she begins to think that she's losing it and is actually crazy, until she finds a drawing that Jane did that night. Jane had drawn her and her cat and signed it. So then she knows to herself, like, okay, I'm not crazy. She then gets an email the next day of her while she was asleep. And so the photo is from 2 a.m, and she gets an email, and it's from guesswhoanna@gmail.com. And the subject line is just Jane Russell, and the photo is of Anna while she was sleeping. So naturally, she calls the police. And they come and they look at everything, and they still think, oh yeah, you're doing it. Like, you did all this, you could have drawn that picture, you could have signed it as Jane. And she's like, oh yeah, what about the photo of me sleeping? And they say, oh yeah, well, she's like, I'm sleeping, my eyes are closed. And it's like, well, or you want it to look like your eyes are closed. So then they want her to think that she did it to herself. And turns out apparently they can't trace Gmail addresses, which I didn't know, and I feel like that might be a lie, because anyways, I feel like the government can do everything, but it's fine. Anyways, she ends up doubting them again, and she says, oh, you know, David, this guy over here, because he came up for the commotion, she said he was a convict, you know, like maybe he did something. So after this whole thing, they still say, you know, I think that you did it yourself. Now David is offended that she thinks he could do that, because he just admitted to her all the stuff about his past and how he's trying to be better. And so then he moves out. She goes to her laptop and opens it and goes to sign into her email, and it says, oh, please sign in again. And the email that she's supposed to sign into that somebody else did previously is guesswhoanna@gmail.com. But there's no password because it was signed out. So then she's like, oh my god, I actually did create this account because it's on my laptop, like I actually took the picture of myself and whatever, and she's starting to realize, like, I'm actually losing it. She talks to her psychiatrist and all these things. So she gives up again, and she's going through her phone and she's looking at the picture of her sleeping again because she downloaded it, and when she starts swiping on her camera roll and looking at pictures of her husband and her daughter, because this was after the detective said, you know, your family's dead, and it kind of all came back to her. There's a picture in her camera roll that she took that night when Jane was there of the window. There was like a pretty sunset or something, and Jane's in the reflection of the window. So now she knows, okay, I did not make this up, like, and now I have physical proof. She starts then talking to Ethan again, because she now has proof, so she's like, he can't deny it anymore, and he's obviously the weakest link, you can tell by how he's so twitchy and stuff, and he finally admits what happened. Also, when he comes over this time, the cat is now like hissing at him and really doesn't like him, and also injured. That becomes important. So that woman wasn't actually Jane. So the police were right. The other Jane, the one that she thought was like the fake Jane, is the real Jane Russell. This woman's name is Katie. So she is the one with the earring, she is the one that slept over at David's place, but her name is not Jane. It goes back and shows how when the woman came over, Anna said, oh, you must be Jane Russell. And she said, why do you think that? Or why would you say that? But like kind of laughed. So she never actually said that that is her name, but she didn't deny it either. So it turns out that Ethan was adopted. So Katie is actually Ethan's mom, which is why she was talking about him so much, and she had a locket with his picture inside. So Katie is Ethan's birth mom, and she wants to get to know him, and Jane and Mr. Russell the actual Jane are his adopted parents, and they don't want her around him because she used to be a drug addict. So Katie ends up going over and getting into a confrontation with them, which is what the screaming was. And then she goes over, spends the night at David's place, leaves her earring there. She goes back the next day, and that's when she gets stabbed. So, and it was Mr. Russell, just because he just wanted this woman to be done with him. She'd followed them from Boston. That was another part of the reason that they had moved. So, and then they covered up the crime, basically. So Anna says to Ethan, you know, we need to go to the police with this, and he gets really upset and says, like, let me talk to my parents first, like, let me see if I can get them to confess. I'll say that you know, and like, just keep your doors locked in case anything happens, basically. He said, I'll say that you know, and that they have to go to the police. Hopefully, like, they're still my parents, I don't want them to get in trouble, that kind of thing. So Anna agrees. Anyways, and says that he has 1 hour, and then she's calling the police. She then falls asleep. She wakes up a few hours later, and she's like, oh crap, and she's looking for her phone, and she reaches towards like where the cat is, and I don't remember what she says, but she says something, and then Ethan talks back to her. So Ethan's in her room in the middle of the night. So then you find out he was lying. What actually happened is Ethan has a personality disorder, which is why the cat liked him at first and then didn't like him the second time that he was there. And the cat was injured because Ethan apparently has been sneaking into Anna's house at night while she's sleeping and watching her sleep. And the cat was injured because the cat had really liked him and was making him sneeze because he's allergic. And so he hurt the cat's foot so that the cat would like stay away from him, which is why then the cat ended up hating him. He has definite mommy issues, is what we have decided. He likes spending his time around older middle-aged women, and that's actually what happened at his last place. The last place they lived in Boston. Mr. Russell did not have an affair with his boss's wife. What happened was that Ethan started sneaking into her house and watching her sleep, and she caught him and got freaked out, so Mr. Russell basically moved the whole family away to try to protect Ethan. He admits to have been sneaking into Anna's house and watching her sleep, and he was the one who emailed her the picture, so she didn't actually take it, and he did it on her laptop so that she would think that she did it because the email was still signed in there. Katie is actually his mom, like that was all true, but actually Ethan stabbed her, and I was reading this being like, what? Oh my gosh. And it was like 3 a.m. because I had to finish the book. So unfortunately, I don't necessarily remember exactly why. I think he was just frustrated with her. And so he stabbed her, and then his parents covered it up because again, all they want to do is protect their son, which at some point you gotta give up. He specifically took a liking to Anna, obviously because of her age and because she was very nice to him from the beginning, but also because she told him, I'm a child psychologist. And so many people tell him that he's crazy, and so he wanted to get close to her because she's a psychologist, and he's like making fun of her basically, like, it's so funny, you didn't even notice I had a personality disorder, like you're obviously not that good at your job, like things like that. Long story short, they end up getting into a big fight, and he's trying to kill her, and there's this big end scene, and anyways, she ends up pushing him on her roof. Her house is very big. She has a skylight that has been like kind of rickety from the very start, and she pushes him onto that, and he falls through and dies. He lands on like 4 floors below, basically. But yeah, see, that's something I didn't even mention before, was that the skylight was broken. Like there's a lot of things like that I didn't mention. There's also a lot of other creepy things that Ethan did, specifically one I could think of, but it just all doesn't matter. There's a lot of little things that added up that I'm not even bothering to discuss because I could be here forever. The police end up apologizing. Anna ends up being able to leave the house, get on with her life. She moves out of the house finally because she still has like her daughter's room all set up, and obviously now there's a lot of bad memories there, so she ends up moving away, and yeah, that's kind of how the book ends. And obviously, again, like I said, the police apologize. They owe her a major apology for calling her crazy and all this stuff when actually it's true, but I mean, like who could have guessed? So that's The Woman in the Window. I didn't like how quickly it ended. Like I said, this was a very detailed book, and it was a fairly detailed story. Say the same thing twice. And then it was just like, yep, she moves, and now she's fine. She can go outside. And it was like, what? Like, it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I know that obviously the rest of it was the main part, but this whole time you're listening to her struggle and how she's working with her psychologist how to get out of the house, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, she's fine now. It's like, wouldn't that be even more traumatizing? But apparently not. Anyways, so I'm gonna do a really quick movie comparison. Like I said, there's a lot of things that were similar. It was a very, very detailed comparison, but one of the few things is like they changed both of the Janes to be blonde instead of have dark hair, which like, why? But whatever, that's fine. In the movie, she had taken a picture of her cat in between the wine glasses and not of the window, and so she sees Jane's reflection in the wine glass. I had wished that they had used the window for that, because I personally, which obviously it wasn't then, but I personally thought that the woman in the window was like a triple thing. It was Anna watching people from the window, it was Jane being murdered and being able to see it through the window, Katie, whatever, and then it was also Anna finding out in the end that she wasn't crazy by seeing Katie's reflection in the window. I thought that the woman in the window meant kind of all of these things, but they ended up using a wine glass in the movie, which, whatever. In the movie, they made it seem like Anna was gonna kill herself, because she had a bunch of pills in front of her and she was kind of taking a suicide video, but that never happened in the book. Like, it was all very strange. It was when she thought that she was delusional and was imagining this whole thing, and it was after that that she sees the picture of Jane, Katie, and realizes that she's not. But I just thought that that was weird, because that didn't happen in the book, like, at all. One of the bigger things that happen is that in the movie they kill David, which, like, I guess I understand why. It's like just for shock value. But in the book, he's like, oh, how rude of you, and then moves out. And then in the movie, he's still like, oh, how rude of you, I'm gonna get my stuff and leave, and then leaves the room, and then Ethan's outside and stabs him, and like then he dies in the hallway. But so I'm just like, why? Poor David. David could have been alive the whole time. Anyways. And what I didn't like, the main thing that I talked about earlier, is they explained a lot less of Ethan's story. They didn't explain that he had a personality disorder. They didn't explain about the wife from like before in Boston. Earlier in the book, it had been the same, where Anna was looking up like, why did they move? And apparently the boss's wife died, which, so that's something that was different, is in the book she didn't die, she just got creeped out so they moved. But in the movie, she had died, and so then it made it look like, oh, Mr. Russell killed her, but now I guess that it was supposed to be that Ethan killed her, but it didn't even explain that. Like, anyways, there was just a couple things like that that they left out, and they didn't explain why the cat didn't like him the second time around, or why the cat was injured. After all that, it was still pretty good. Like, I would still recommend it. I found the ending a little bit confusing, just because my mind was kind of like, whoa, this is so different than the part that I read 12 hours ago. So I just found it a little bit like confusing. I don't know if other people would, if that was all like normal to them, but I just thought that the book made it so much more twisted and creepier, and like the personality disorder and things like that. Whereas in the movie, it was like, oh, he's a sweet kid. And then it's like, nope, he's a murderer. And there was just no reason why like his personality changed. So I wish that they had explained that more in the movie. But other than that, it was a really good job. Amy Adams did great. Not that I'm really a film critic, but she is amazing in these things. We grew up watching her in Enchanted. I assume a lot of people did. And so then watching her in Sharp Objects is very dark, and then this is a little less dark, but still very dark. So yeah, she definitely has a large capacity for what she can act. She's very broad in her acting roles. Yeah. I can't think of what the word is, but there's a word for it.
There is a word.
It's fine, it doesn't matter. So yeah, that's gonna be all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments if you read it or watched it and what your thoughts were. You can also message me on the Instagram that we have. If it's spoiler related, try to do that, just because I don't want other people that just want to see the non-spoiler part read the comments. Yeah, I think that that's everything. Reminder to get vaccinated, everybody. We need to be safe. And I think that that'll be all for The Woman in the Window. Again, I rated it 5 stars, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys. And